Alright, what is on the docket today? At this point, it's hard not to sing the same praises when compared to the literal 100 other videos on the topic. Banjo-Kazooie is almost universally considered to be one of the top platformers out there, and is an absolute classic amongst the gaming community. The characters, the moves, the witty dialogue, the music, the mysteries. It's got the whole package. So after the success of the first game, it seemed obvious that this would be a long-running franchise. However, when Banjo-Threeie was released in late 2000, there was no news of a third console game for almost 6 years. Until... Oh my god, a new Banjo game? Yes, Rare is back! I can't wait! This is gonna be amazing! What? As you could guess, going from platforming to cars, boats, and planes was a heavy change in direction, and fans were understandably shocked. The initial teaser dropped months before the actual gameplay was revealed, and there were zero signs that this upcoming title would have anything to do with vehicles. Finally a sequel. And it's not a platformer, but you know what? I'll give this Rare idea a shot. They've surprised me before. Reception was less than stellar. While game critics praised Nuts and Bolts' creative direction, fans in general had a lot to complain about, and this led to dissuade others from giving the game a chance. And that's a shame, because when you put aside the fact that Rare took a different direction here, Nuts and Bolts can be argued to be a solid experience overall, not to mention innovative for its time. While certainly not for everyone, the game still deserves a better reputation than it did on release, and to this day. So today, we're going to debunk the more popular criticisms of Nuts and Bolts, and then bring up some of its actual issues. But first, we gotta cover how we went from classic platformer to vehicle builder. We begin our tale by traveling back to the mid-2000s. After settling into their new home at Microsoft, Rare started development towards their first idea, dubbed Banjo-X. The idea was to bring Banjo-Kazooie up to the current generation of graphics, but add new and unexpected sequences to the game, not present in the original. For example, in Mumbo's Mountain, there were ideas to have a termite queen pop out from the top of the mountain, and you'd have to ask Conga the ape to throw oranges at it. Reportedly, there would have been cameos from Banjo-Tooie characters as well. This idea mainly stemmed from wanting to surprise new and old players alike. At a Tales from Twycross developer panel, Greg Males stated, "We started exploring what could we do differently for a third game that maybe would take people by surprise, kinda shake the genre up a bit." However, as development progressed, there was growing concern that players would still see it as a remake of Banjo-Kazooie, despite the changes. When series composer Grant Kirkhope was asked about Banjo-X, he stated, "A lot of senior guys on the team, me included, thought that was a bad idea, so we sort of moaned about it quite a lot. And it went ahead a little bit, and we said, in all the time it would take to retexture all these levels and make it look great, we might as well just do a newer game." So after some more convincing from the dev team, Banjo-X was ultimately scrapped. The second idea was a Banjo vs. Gruntilda type of game. This would have been a more traditional Banjo platformer, but with a twist. Gruntilda would play out the levels at the same time. Consider Mumbo's Mountain again. Think of gameplay where Banjo starts collecting notes and jiggies on the hill closest to the start, while Gruntilda instead travels across the bridge to pick up collectibles in that area. Once again, opposition arose due to concerns for how difficult it would be to integrate this level of AI behavior. So, seeing it as a bit too ambitious, that idea was also scrapped. The third idea started with a question. How do we make the traveling bits of a game fun? The traveling bits, meaning the parts where a player travels from one objective to the next. This was answered by considering a couple of things. Rare recently acquiring a new physics engine, and a desire to allow players to choose how they travel. Obviously, vehicles came to mind for providing travel options, but Rare also wanted to utilize the power of the Havok physics engine towards the vehicles and how they responded when driving. And how do you let players choose how they travel? The answer to that question came from Tim Stamper himself, who proposed a Lego set kind of concept, which eventually led to the voxel-based vehicle creation system. With that last puzzle piece in place, the idea was solidified, and the team began work on what ultimately became known as the one, the only, the widely criticized Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Similar to previous entries, you are once again tasked with collecting those good old Jiggies in order to progress. Just look at them in their shiny HD glory. Accessed via the hub world, dubbed Showdown Town, you can travel to different levels, which are each split into 6 unique acts, minus the last level. The difference between these acts mostly include what missions are available, but sometimes the level itself will change in some way, either being the time of day or the environment itself. Now, each level contains your familiar cast of characters acting as keepers of missions that reward you with notes, jiggies, and trophies. For the top performing players, we'll get into that later. They're what push you to build specific vehicles to solve their level-themed problems. For example, there's an early mission where you have to get rid of burning rocks to protect Mumbo's nuts. So you have to ask yourself...
Excuse me, what?
What? It's because Mumbo owns a farm in the first level. They harvest coconuts? Mumbo, can you explain, please? See? Thank you, Mumbo. Anyway, so you have to ask yourself, how do I do this? One idea is to pick them up in a trolley and drive them into the river. Another aerial approach is to use a sticky ball gadget to lift them up and drop them off. You could also take a brute force approach and build something strong and fast that just launches them across the map into the ocean. At the end of the day, you're free to tackle the problem however you want. There are other missions that give you a pre-made vehicle to work with, which are also fun, but a majority of them give you this freedom, which is one of the biggest selling factors of the game. So yeah, that pretty much sums up the core game loop. Complete missions, collect Jiggies, and earn more parts for later missions. With over 100 Jiggies to collect and plenty of missions to create vehicles for, what's not to like? A lot, apparently. At the end of the day, people just wanted Banjo-Threeie. They still want Banjo-Threeie, and last year's Banjo-related announcement proved that. Unfortunately, passionate fans are a major source of these vocal, opinionated comments, which in turn fuel the nuts and bolts is a bad game fire. And they do this without even giving the game a shot. Now they're right, it's not a platformer, and it falls flat on its face attempting to be one. If you're wanting that kind of experience, then yeah, it's not the game for you, and you should go elsewhere. But the end opinion shouldn't be, the game's bad because it's not a platformer. It should be, the game's not a platformer, and it's not for me. This criticism simply comes down to people spouting off personal preferences. It just needs to be mentioned because this comment is everywhere when nuts and bolts is involved. Additionally, because of the Microsoft buyout and different management, people assumed that Rare was forced to use Banjo-Kazooie to help save the game and ensure sales. They thought the popularity of the series was used first and foremost to sell the game. The thing is, from day one, all the brainstorming for the game's direction included the Banjo-Kazooie IP. To Rare, this was the third console installment of Banjo-Kazooie, and that was always the plan. Based on the 3 ideas they went through and Greg's lack of enthusiasm about creating another platformer, Banjo-Threeie was never in the cards in the first place. Greg simply wanted to go in a different direction. So they didn't just come up with the vehicle creation concept and then slap on Banjo-Kazooie to ensure sales. To that point, it is debatable why Rare continued to use Banjo-Kazooie after the game's direction was decided. Maybe they thought they could combine the IP well enough with the vehicle gameplay. Maybe they simply just wanted to deliver another Banjo-Kazooie game, which I'm personally more inclined to believe. I wasn't able to dig up any direct quotes regarding this, but there have been statements from some of the developers mentioning that in hindsight, they probably could have packaged the game differently. So, the fact that Banjo-Kazooie may not have been the most appropriate IP to use was at least acknowledged by the team. Another common complaint is the levels are too big and too empty. This, however, relates back to the fans' preference for platformers, along with the misunderstanding of why the levels are like that. They were never intended to be designed for platformers, they were designed to be fun to drive and fly around in. And that turned into a good decision, because most vehicles can get across all of the levels in under a minute, tops. So being big was a must-have to give you that elbow room to play around with your vehicles. The too empty criticism is also misunderstood. What critics don't realize is that when they accuse the levels of being empty, they're talking about the effect of a design decision, not the cause itself. You see, when we go back to what the core game loop is, the missions are what push the player forward. The levels are set up as arenas that support what the mission's content can be, versus being filled with activities and platforming challenges. There are already 6 different acts for each level to hunt down each mission in, so the devs clearly didn't want to distract you with platforming challenges or activities. They wanted you to go from mission to mission to keep the game moving forward, because at the end of the day, that's where the content is. While the lack of content from the levels themselves is noticeable, I wouldn't go as far to say it negatively impacts the overall experience purely because it supports the core game loop. Take Breath of the Wild, for instance. Some people complained that it didn't have enough traditional Zelda-like dungeons to sink your teeth into, despite how the divine beasts were set up. Well, there weren't any to that degree because that would go against Breath of the Wild's core game loop, which was explore, discover, be rewarded. Having a lengthy dungeon in the middle of that loop would ruin the velocity the game is trying to deliver. Now, I'm not accusing people of wanting every shrine to be a traditional Zelda dungeon length experience, but rather that their preference comes down to be, well, just that, a personal preference. Breath of the Wild is universally seen as one of the best Zelda games out there, despite its lack of dungeon-based content, and that's because it's judged based on what it was trying to accomplish, which it does fantastically, by the way. Nuts and Bolts deserves that same kind of critique. Yes, the levels are big. Yes, they can be empty on their own. But since it serves a purpose and doesn't infringe on the game's intended experience, it shouldn't be seen as a negative in its own light. The last criticism we'll be covering is the story. When I first saw how much this got brought up, I thought, really? Weak story a legit concern? What did Save Your Sister and Stop the Life-Sucking Machine have that Nuts and Bolts didn't? It's not even like people were expecting anything to be resolved plot-wise. After all, it wasn't a Halo 2 scenario where we got left with a cliffhanger at the end. It's a standalone story, so why is it consistently brought up? Well, turns out, there is some merit to this argument, and it brings about a few interesting points. Let's dive right in. The intro begins with a tour around the remastered Spiral Mountain, while recapping events from the past 2 console games. This, in turn, shows off the HD graphics upgrade. Nice touch, Rare. So what have our heroes been up to all these years? Nothing. Besides going time traveling and piloting planes, they've just been enjoying playing games, eating pizza, and adding on a few pounds. But their relaxation is cut short as Gruntilda's skull finds its way into Spiral Mountain. After some effort on Banjo's part, the bear, bird, and witch finally reunite to duke it out once again. Oh, this is it! What kind of battle are we in for? Turns out the Lord of Games, or LOG for short, wants to be part of the action. They act as a judge throughout the game and declare this fight is for the rights to Spiral Mountain. Then, everyone gets sent through the portal to Showdown Town, where you're introduced to the main objective, you get your magical wrench, Mumbo shows off his workshop, you learn Gruntilda's now a mechanic, somehow, and with all that, you're finally off to the races. Literally. On one hand, the story does its job of introducing the game's core loop and gives you an end goal to work towards. There's nothing really pushing you forward as much as the previous entries. No sister to save, no deaths to undo. But it does the job to get you playing and creating vehicles. So, goal achieved. Story is decent enough and serves its purpose, right? I think what rubbed people the wrong way was that the previous stories were more grounded than this one. By that, I mean they were stories that you could experience and be like, yeah, I can see that happening. The characters you met, the places you traveled, it all felt natural, like it belonged there. Nuts and Bolts, while still achieving story continuity, does feel like a more far-fetched storyline. While I do love the concept of this Overlord-type character existing in our video game universe, LOG's way of breaking the fourth wall is the exact reason why the story feels less grounded. He literally pops in out of nowhere and goes, "Hey guys, I see you're fighting, let's make this more interesting. I'll set up different arenas for you to battle in over in this completely different world. I'll even warp you over there. Let's go! And you better accept my invite or else I'll do unspeakable things to all of you, like this!" Oh, okay, let's go then. So right from the get-go, the story separates you from the world you're familiar with and introduces you to this town with a familiar set of faces, but seemingly no connection to previous games' settings. And after Log's way of pushing themselves into the story, you feel even less grounded. All that being said, I still don't see the story as a huge negative. This isn't the Banjo-Threeie fans necessarily wanted, so already, the story shouldn't have this expectation of being grounded in the first place. The gameplay is the selling point, and it's the story's job to create an objective to work towards and offer a resolution to. And at the end of the day, it does, even if it feels more out of place compared to previous games. Okay, so we've debunked game's not a platformer, using the Banjo-Kazooie IP, level size, and weak story. If all of those are more complaints than actual criticisms, what's actually wrong with the game? When Nuts and Bolts was announced, it was advertised as a game where the players would be presented with lots of unique missions that would require creative solutions for each one. Go transport this bomb to avoid blowing up Mumbo's nuts. The farm. Lift this poisonous ball high in the air to make it explode. Knock over the most dominoes. Throw away the trash. Now, pop quiz. What was similar in each of those clips? Here's them all together. Still not seeing it? How about now? Know what that is? That's a performance bar that tells you how well you're doing. And this is unexpectedly one of the biggest factors contributing to a tug-of-war of what Nuts and Bolts wants to be. A creative sandbox or a collectathon. You see, when you complete a mission, you're graded on your performance. First level is notes, second level is the jiggy, and third is a trophy. Now you need jiggies to get through the game, but 4 trophies nets you a jiggy. So now you have to get those, right? And you only earn those by being the fastest in a race or scoring the most points. In other words, being the best performer. This is the moment that the game becomes a checklist, which is something you want to avoid in any type of collectathon. You've now been told you have to perform the best to get all the items. This forces creativity to take a backseat to prioritize this new underlying objective. How so? Because you indirectly tell the player that everything they come up with better perform well because you're being rewarded based on placement, not creativity. That hurts because now you have this pressure in the back of your mind that you need to perform well to win. And if you want that freedom to tackle challenges how you'd like, then you have to live with the fact that it may not be the most efficient way to go about it. Arguably, you could just simply ignore that fact, focus on getting jiggies over all the trophies, and be satisfied. But that's putting a lot of reliance on the player, instead of having the game guide them through a cohesive experience like it should. Take this for example. There's an escort mission where you have to protect Mr. Fit as he jogs up this hill while being routinely attacked by bots. You decide to go with a more defensive approach and wind up coming up with an original, clever solution that involves creating a big enough vehicle to shield Mr. Fit. You've also built your vehicle using heavy parts and armor to make sure it can sustain each wave of bots, along with some weapons that can take out the bots. When you start the mission, you go through 4 to 5 waves and see your ideas working flawlessly. But at the home stretch, you get unexpectedly ambushed by a large amount of bots, and Mr. Fit takes damage that pushes the performance bar into the yellow. Now you do win shortly after, but because of that bar, you can feel one of 2 things. Either, oh whoa, I was not expecting that, but we pulled through and my creation worked. Or, man, I was robbed and I could have gotten all the rewards. Now I have to do this again. The fact that the player isn't guaranteed to feel that first option, that directly relates to the game's theme of creativity, speaks volumes about the amount of conflicting objectives that exist. To clarify, this isn't about making missions easier or anything. It's about promoting a theme and doing everything you can to execute on it. If your game is about giving players freedom to be creative, you need to reward them for that. You can't throw 2 different challenges out at the same time and expect them to be received equally. This isn't only damaging on a mission-by-mission basis. Replayability suffers as well due to this tug-of-war. In later missions, you'll inevitably face a similar type of challenge and think, oh yeah, I have just the vehicle for that. If it's just another pick up item and move here mission, what's to stop you from reusing the good old pickup copter to do the job again? Especially if it's guaranteed to net you all the prizes that, as determined, you need to collect. The thing is, once you find a solution, there's nothing pulling you back to a mission. You've already checked it off after all and moved on to the next one. There's nothing encouraging you to tackle it in a different way aside from setting personal restrictions on yourself for fun. But only a small amount of players who are really invested in the game will do that. For a majority of the player base, this just makes the overall experience shorter than it should have been. What Rare unintentionally created is this experience of, it's not about the journey, it's about the destination. And when you start off with the idea make the traveling bits of a game fun, that's concerning. I think there was probably a higher priority of adding in different things that appeal to different gamers, and they felt like they were covering more bases as opposed to making sure everything meshed together well. After all, you've got your vehicle editor for the creative types, top prizes for the best performing, and lots of things to find for the collectathon enthusiasts. It's just unfortunate that all these things combined cause this tug-of-war, and how much the player can feel it throughout the game. Again, could you just ignore this performance bar and just play the game at your own pace? For sure. I just believe that all aspects of your game should mesh well together to provide a smooth journey. If you start adding too many things and it starts agitating that smoothness, you need to reevaluate and readjust to prevent a more turbulent experience overall. While it may not sound like it, I do love this game. When it was first announced, I fell into the same trap as everyone did, thinking it was a platformer and then hearing about the vehicles. But the thing is, I really believed Rare was trying to do something unique while still staying true to the Banjo-Kazooie IP. And after trying out the demo and giving the game its fair shot, I had a blast. I was so happy to see the whole gang back in action, and with some new faces. I was mesmerized by the level design, the missions that complemented each one, and those hilarious intro videos based on famous TV shows. And spending evenings trying out a new idea for a vehicle and seeing it come to fruition was seriously one of the most fulfilling experiences I've ever had with a game. So, with the development history and negative opinions being explained, I really hope you give Nuts and Bolts the fair chance it deserves. And hey, if you're still hesitant, maybe these next clips will help convince you otherwise.